Turn the controls over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Amy.
You're welcome.
Mike, did you get that notification about the Teams starting? Do you want me to go over there and check that out?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll leave this and come right back.
Hello, everybody, and welcome, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Mike Daly with RPK Group. Happy to be sharing this hour or so with all of you. You may have realized when you logged on to this meeting that we are live streaming this meeting. If you haven't done so already, I would encourage and ask you to please mute your microphone unless you're going to speak, to reduce the opportunity for any unintentional noise. As I said, I'm happy to be here today, but also joined by some colleagues of mine at RPK Group. RPK Group senior partner Rick Stasloff is with us today, as well as my colleague Katie Hagan. Katie Hagan will be monitoring the chat and throwing in some links as relevant throughout our conversation today. Please feel free to use the chat for any questions you may have. We've bucketed some times at the end of this short presentation to allow for, as much as possible, a thorough answering of those questions. So what we're sharing today is an academic portfolio review framework for the Regents and institutions to consider. You see kind of our map of how we're going to walk ourselves through that framework. We'll start with a little bit of project background, understanding that many of you, especially those of you who have served on the data team and the steering team and KBOR staff, are intimately familiar with kind of how we got here, but do want to provide some context for those of you who may be newer to this conversation and understand kind of the work that went into getting us to the place where we're at today. As I said, we'll spend some time thinking about questions and answers, hearing your feedback about what we're going to share today, and then position our next steps as we think about deliverables to the Regents in December 14th. A little bit of project background to start with. So you can see there's two clear deliverables that RPK was charged with bringing to the Regents, to KBOR staff, and to institutions. Those are the academic portfolio review and a workload review. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Regents, especially those Regents on the call today, for initiating this process really almost 10 months ago. These are not easy issues, whether we're talking about an academic portfolio review framework or a workload review. They're not easy issues for systems, for institutions, for administrators, for faculty, for students to grapple with. There's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of nuances, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. There are, however, some critical elements, and these are the critical elements to ensuring the immediate and long-term sustainability of public higher education systems and the opportunities that those systems and institutions provide to students and communities. This is all to say you're asking the right questions, and we hope that the framework that we're bringing forward today with respect to the academic portfolio review will allow you to begin answering those questions with clarity and transparency. As the slide says, the workload review, institutions have received all the data informing that workload review. The final summary report will be shared in January and made available to all stakeholders. So a project of this size and scope requires a lot of time, a lot of knowledge, a lot of effort from any number of individuals and groups. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the steering team, the data team, members of the faculty advisory group, to KBOR staff, especially those in the data and research planning team. Individually and collectively, you've asked questions, you've provided data, you've asked more questions, and perhaps most importantly, you've remained engaged in being informed about this critical work. It's my hope that your efforts continue today and moving forward. As we've done in all our meetings to date, we'll allow time at the end for open and candid conversations. We'll share this presentation on the project website and really lean into you to make sure that you have the information that you need and that you're bringing that information back in the ways that you're comfortable with to your stakeholders and your constituents. Outside of those core groups, a public project website continues to provide an additional avenue for interested persons to learn more about the work being done and to ask questions. We've had the opportunity to meet with institutions individually upon request to discuss data and analysis. We've had the opportunity to provide updates to BASC and to Regents. All this said, there's been a lot of project communication and engagement. There's always the opportunity to do more, and we look forward to hearing from all of you about ways in which we can begin to further inform you about the work that we're bringing forward. We've done a little bit of background established. I want to move us forward and unpack the academic portfolio review framework that we're bringing forward for consideration. I want to do so by providing some context and clarity about what the framework being positioned is and what it's not. The framework's intended to be an at-a-glance understanding for Regents and institutions of the trajectory of the academic portfolio across institutions. By doing so, have the opportunity to appropriately focus energies and efforts in a timely manner. The framework is not intended to generate program elimination. Regents, KBOR staff, institutions, faculty have demonstrated that those decisions are local ones and that they're approached through institutions' established processes. Understanding the functional difference between an academic program review, that process and procedure that resides at the local level at the institution that's really driven by institutions, and an academic portfolio review framework is really crucial to our understanding of how KBOR might move forward. When you think about the program review, an established cycle, 8-year cycle at MAC, which institutions submit reportings and findings to KBOR. There's some common required elements on an evaluation process across institutions. Institutions can add some qualitative narrative summaries too. It uses some standard metrics, brings in some elements of mission, how this is tied to a core mission of an institution, looks externally, how is this meeting some external demands, and allows institutions to make some final recommendations on that specific program, continue, discontinue, and enhancement. When we think about a portfolio review, the portfolio review framework that we bring forward, that's specifically intended for a system level view. And it allows for an annual and continuous monitoring of all academic programs across institutions. But it rolls up those institutions' academic programs into larger categories. So there's an easier path to understand what's happening and where, and still allows for that important program review process to happen at institutions. Utilizes some baseline metrics derived from quantitative data that allows, again, for that continuous monitoring. And most importantly, as we'll point out in our framework, it also allows to understand what's happening currently, but gives some direction on what might happen in the future. And so as new program proposals are vetted, are brought up through established processes, they can be put against the existing system portfolio to have the opportunity to predict success more accurately. So our proposed academic portfolio framework understands degree activity in a KBOR portfolio, degree programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level during the 2017-21 timeframe. We're specifically focusing on current active programs. There's some methodology slides in the appendix of this presentation. This presentation will be shared on the project website. Encourage you to kind of look at the methodology if you have specific questions of kind of what's included and what's not included. But within that structure, there's 688 individual programs in the analysis. When we roll up those programs, as I spoke to earlier, into 4-digit zip codes, there's 333 unique programs. As with every institution, every system we work with, there's areas of concentration, and noting those area concentrations are important to kind of having that baseline understanding of what the portfolio looks like. So we think about 70% of students in academic programs across institutions are at the bachelor's level. And 55% of students are concentrated in 5 academic disciplines when we think about what programs are enrolled in: business, education, engineering, health professions, and psychology. Again, in our work at RPK across the country with systems with institutions, large and small, public and private, concentrations such as these as common. What's important to realize, to take away from these concentrations, is where there's duplication, and how these concentrations might lead towards unnecessary duplication or unintended duplications. And those duplications require the investments of time, people, and money. And so knowing where duplications exist, and to the extent that they are designed around student interest and demonstrated success, is also a critical element of understanding that landscape view of the KBOR portfolio. You can also view KBOR's academic portfolio through the lens of institutions' Carnegie classification. It offers another entry point of understanding of where program activity is concentrated, why specific Carnegie classification institutions might be offering specific programs. So 64% of total headcount from 2017-2021 occurred at KBOR's 3 doctoral universities, and those same universities produce 65% of degrees awarded across the system. While this visual shows 5-year averages for headcount degree production, the institution trends generating those averages follow more macro trends in higher education, which are being realized by all KBOR institutions. There are less students enrolling in programs and less students earning degrees. And so it's with that understanding of the foundations of KBOR's academic portfolio that I want to move us forward into the components of the framework that we're bringing for consideration, to unpack the approach to our analysis, and then walk us through a demonstration of how that framework might provide regents and institutions with an ongoing capacity to really fully answer the question, what does a good academic portfolio look like? As I've shared earlier, there are important and critical distinctions between institution-led program review and a systems effort to structure an annual academic portfolio framework that allows for continuous monitoring. We are putting forward that KBOR continue with some modifications around timeline and focus, a requirement for institutions to continue to conduct program reviews as they're informative for both institutions and the system. The framework that we're sharing can be used by regents and institutions for annual monitoring of the academic portfolio. It posits student demand and success as understood through enrollment trends and degree production averaged over 5 years as an initial categorization, and provides some suggestion for actions tied to those categories. Over time, tying in additional student success metrics and labor market alignment can expand the framework as necessary. And so we see 3 main categories in our framework. Each category has those suggested actions for regents and institutions to consider taking. At the same time, the framework presents an opportunity for regents and institutions to develop or think about developing and improving standards relating to how new programs are considered and approved, with an effort and an idea that ensuring that unnecessary duplication is avoided. In doing so, institutions and CABOR will be positioned for positive iterations of the portfolio moving forward, positive iterations that are in response to changing student and external demands. System level understanding of the academic portfolio offered by CABOR institutions, captured by an assessment of the primary metrics that we just put forward, headcount growth, and degree production, was applied to each institution's portfolio. Those institutional results were aggregated to provide this system level overview of the academic portfolio in 3 categories: maintain, optimize, and monitor and review. The visualization that you're seeing is a program framework applied again to the entire systems and offers some suggested practices for how program activity might direct system and institutions' attention, time, and energy while still integrating existing program review processes. The distribution for the system, where we have 16% of programs in the maintain category, 58% in the optimized category, and 26% in the monitor and review category, both in volume and percent of programs. That distribution is normal, and in part due to overall declines in enrollment across CABOR institutions during the time frame that we're looking at, 2017-2021. Those declines, again, are following more macro trends in higher education. It might feel like, it might look like that this visualization means that there are 177 programs to eliminate. That is not what the framework intends, nor is the suggestion that is being made. A key area for regents and institutions to consider is where in the portfolio there are duplicative programs that are identified as optimize or monitor and review, and to lean into existing institutional program review processes to understand more deeply those program trajectories and contributions to student success. We're going to walk through how we might put this into practice in the next few slides. The framework allows regents and institutions to know, again, on an ongoing basis, when there are multiple institutions offering the same program, and where all instances of that program are not yet meeting institutional median enrollments, institutional median degree production, or demonstrating program or growth. And these are programs in the optimize or review and monitor categories within this framework. We're identifying duplication as programs that are offered at 4 or more institutions. So based on the data from 2017-2021 for academic programs, there are 13 bachelor programs that are duplicated across the system. No instances of these programs are identified as maintained at their respective institutions. So look at the physics bachelor's degree, 2 up from the bottom. This is a program offered at 6 institutions. At each institution, this program is targeted for review and monitored when compared to that institution's own academic portfolio. There are also 9 master's programs that are duplicated across the system and identifying as optimize or review and monitor. Again, these are programs in those categories at their respective institutions. There are also 6 programs, chemistry, history, mathematics, physics, English, and fine arts, that are duplicating categorized as optimize or review and monitor at both the bachelor's and master's level. So we think about some pipeline issues. That is potentially another area for systems and institutions to begin exploring and understanding student trajectories within those specific degree levels. The framework moves regents and institutions from awareness of programs, category classifications, and duplication to a more focused review. On the previous bachelor's degree slide, I mentioned physics. I want to take us through a closer look at that 1-degree program as a working example. This is again a program, physics bachelor's, that is offered at every institution. All programs are in the review and monitor category at their respective institution. Noticeable declines in headcount for all and degree production declining for 5 of 6. As suggested earlier in our framework, we apply the existing KBOR minimum to the programs. It highlights 3 instances of this program not meeting the minimum for headcount. Another set of 3 institutions are not meeting the minimum for degree production. Again, it's the integration of how the academic portfolio review framework at the system level can be understood through the additional finer grained lens of the program review that's occurring at the institutional level. Of note, for all institutions, getting students through the program, looking at average degree production, points towards needed action. Can also bring in here as an example some of the secondary metrics, particularly wage and employment category, thinking about graduates who are employed at Kansas and Missouri is the data informing this metric. So graduates with this degree, physics bachelor, who find employment in Kansas and Missouri typically earn a high wage. It's a positive. It's a great thing to celebrate. But few graduates at the bachelor's level are employed at Kansas and Missouri. Doesn't mean they're not employed elsewhere. Again, our data constricts us to Kansas and Missouri, but certainly can realize those that do graduate with this degree and find employment in that defined geographical area have the opportunity to earn a higher median wage. We can also use this data to extend to a realization of the impact of small graduation cohorts at upper-level courses. How lower enrollments still require discipline-specific faculty and rigorous offering of upper-level courses to ensure that students have that time and degree pathway to graduation, and what that does to creating less efficient offerings within institutional academic. And so questions for regents and for institutions as we look at data as a working example is how have institutional program reviews shared these trends that we're seeing here? Does a STEM discipline that is demonstrating poor the category of review and monitor require regents intervention to better understand localized issues related to program health? And can those localized issues be addressed at the system level? Or can institutions collaborate to better understand approaches to improving student outcomes in a discipline that's been specifically targeted by KBOR STEM as being critical to the overall economic health of the region? So again, one example of how identification leads to focus, and from there, some action steps that might be taken. And for each of the instances where there's duplication of programs at the various levels, bachelor's or master's, there was no instances of duplication at the doctoral level that fell into the categories we designed for review and monitor or optimized, there's the opportunity to take action. We would not expect that action to be the same for every scenario. We would expect different questions and different answers, both at the system level and at the individual institution. Adopting an academic portfolio review framework like we've put forward for consideration today also prevents the need to adjust and align current practices to sustain the positive benefits that we think systems, the KBOR system and institutions can realize from that framework. So our suggestion for those steps is to modify the current institution-led program review cycle to allow for tighter connections to the academic portfolio review framework. Again, focusing specific attention on those programs that have been identified as duplicative and falling into the categories of optimize or review and monitor. We'd also encourage to utilize existing data structures to produce the academic portfolio review framework and related reports on an annual basis. It should not be something that's done once. It should be kind of a culture change and something that happens on an ongoing, continuous basis. It's also the opportunity to leverage existing resources for training opportunities, for information sharing to ensure that all stakeholders, chief academic officers, regents, faculty, shared governance leaders, deans, department chairs, remain informed of the annual academic portfolio review framework, the data it provides, and the action that it might indicate. And as suggested earlier, over time, as processes are established and smooth out, additional metrics, additional student success metrics and labor market alignment in the academic portfolio review framework has the opportunity to provide additional clarity on program performance.
Mike, can we take, well, I know we're getting to Q&A. We have a
Yep.
question in the Zoom
Definitely.
chat.
Yep.
Back to kind of the prior slide around this additional metrics that could be included. So the question is, what is the additional context for degree programs, like the physics example, that also have extensive research components and generate extensive funding? So how would you recommend the Regents in this portfolio review kind of consider elements like that? What's the appropriate place for those metrics?
Yeah, I think the appropriate place for those metrics is kind of where they currently reside, and that's in the existing program review processes. Some of the questions and the narrative qualitative information that institutions and departments can share about specific programs with respect to contributions related to research for how that specific program offering aligns with research funding and generate significant external funds for the institution are critical and important elements to be realized in that program review process. And so it's why we don't want to say, just because a specific program falls in a category, there's an immediate call to action and this has to happen. Rather, we're positioning the framework, the system level framework, as an indicator for system and institutions to dig a little more deeply into that program review process. It may be the case that the program review process for those specific programs speeds up in time. And so it's every 2 years or every 3 years until there's kind of an adjustment and an understanding of what's happening and why that specific program is categorized where it is.
Thank you. Regent Kiplinger?
Thank you. After I figure out how to raise my hand, then I have to figure out how to take it down again. A couple of comments. So I like the nomenclature that you've chosen for how you lay these programs out, because I think it's very non-judgmental in that it says, okay, take a look. But doesn't imply what that recommendation is going to be upon further investigation. So I really like that. Thank you for that. So I have a question about the SIP codes, just to make sure that I'm understanding that. So the 333 unique programs, those were rolled up using a 2-digit SIP code. So SIP codes kind of work like zip codes, right? This is like broad, and then as you get to 3-digit and 4-digit, it gets much more granular, correct?
Correct, Regent Kiplinger. Our data and framework uses a 4-digit SIP code and degree level. So you would see kind of bachelor's, master, and the appropriate SIP code assigned to it. That is a step above where institutional program review happens right now. Institutional program review resides where it should, at a more granular 6-digit SIP code. And that's an important distinction. And so again, the system level portfolio review framework provides direction, but it'll also be necessary to ask additional questions. Okay, what 6-digit programs, what particular localized programs are falling into this larger bucket?
Thank you. And then, go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick clarification. Mike, can you go back to slide 8? I think that'll help clarify the 2 versus 4 question, because it actually it is 2 different graphics. So
yeah, I was going to say there's another one.
Yeah. So on the left is
next question.
Yeah. The pie chart is 4-digit. The stacked bar is 2-digit, just to get to the discipline level of concentration. So the 2-digit is that discipline function. Yeah.
As I start to think about BASC, I chair the Academic Affairs Committee currently, and I think about our existing process of program review that we see at the board level, and I think about program approval for new programming or program discontinuation or merger. Those do come through us too, but mostly we're looking at new programming. One of the things that is sometimes mentioned in the narrative that's brought forward by universities, but not always, does talk about those SIP codes and where things fall. So would that be, that further study and analysis, would that be part of those recommendations that we should be tying our conversation and discussion more closely to that? Because I know we could do a crosswalk then between those SIP codes and job demands in those broader fields. And it would seem like maybe that would be a logical next step. And I think a lot of that is happening at the universities as they bring new programs forward to us, because as I said, I see some of that in those narratives, but it isn't something that I think we've officially, made part of our new program approval process. So how might that fit in, or is that appropriate based on this work? And are the things lining up in my thinking correctly?
They are, and I want to thank you for doing so with the clarity. I think, there's the potential to know what's kind of in the current portfolio. I think we've kind of got that, but also think about, reducing the opportunity to perpetuate kind of past practices that might have kind of provided for duplication where it's not necessary in some cases. And so in new program proposals, institutions will kind of have that clarity. Where's it offered? How's it doing well? BASC and then regions serving on BASC and the board writ large will also have the opportunity to say, gosh, this program looks great. You've made a great case for it. We're interested in knowing kind of how it's going to be different from the other 4 programs that we have already that are not doing kind of as well as we thought they were going to do. And so what's going to be different, and how does this kind of add on to some attention that we're paying already to existing program structures?
And I think that's important, and I kind of like the way you phrase that, because it builds on an idea that I have had that this might be helpful with, is as we see programs declining in enrollment just overall in the state and nation, at post-secondary decreasing, a fear that I have as a regent, and particularly one serving on BASC, is when we approve a new program, I don't want to approve a new program, at institution number 3, if institution number 1 and 2 and 4 already have that program and it's struggling, and opening one more just dilutes perhaps the available applicants, unless we can see from zip codes and job demand that, okay, we need to do a better job marketing this because Kansas needs these workers, and putting one in another area is going to lift everybody up and get more people, because students do choose what they major in sometimes based on, well, this program is close to home. Oh, that's not offered, so I guess I'll do my second choice. But thank you, that's helpful. I think I'm getting my mind around how this might be useful at a system level, but I look forward now to hearing what others have to say, because my thinking is only my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Kiplinger. I also want to acknowledge and thank you for your viewing of kind of how we framed the categories. That was an adjustment we made based on some feedback from K-Board staff yesterday. So for institutions who received data earlier than that, you might see some different wording. We want to be in kind of the phrasing of the categories informative and raise awareness, but not necessarily indicate a certain status in terms of what the program ultimate trajectory is. Barb, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for the presentation. And I want to build on the question or the conversation that Regent Kiplinger was just having, along with the question from my colleague at K-State. And that goes to, it sounds to me like what you're proposing here is we have some common data set that we're now using to be data informed in reviewing programs and also considering new programs. That data is built on looking at market and looking at completion and looking at student headcount and student credit hours in areas, and that the review that occurs at the Regents level is somewhat more system-wide, as opposed to any given institution, just what are we doing about our programs? So you're nodding your head, so my assumptions are all right about kind of basically what you're proposing here and what happens. And that you give us those action definitions of we're optimizing, we're reviewing and monitoring, et cetera. So that gets to kind of a little bit of what I heard Regent Kiplinger say and what Laurel wrote in the chat. I gather there is space for when a program's doing well or enrollments are doing well, that everybody has that, and that's appropriate. I also know, there's behind that, there's, yeah, you've got enrollments, but you're not completing them. That's an engagement issue, and that's a retention and completion issue that we could then look at. So if we've got massively huge DFW rates in something, or we're not seeing students through. Maybe it's not that we don't need the program. Maybe that's part of optimizing what that is. So understanding what that is. So it's good to see you nodding that, yes, just because you have low completion rates doesn't mean actually you get rid of the program. You might need to think about how you actually are getting your students to persist in the program if the program meets a state need, a workforce development need, and market need. And then the last point is duplication with distinction. And this is the point I really want to make is we can duplicate programs. We could bring new programs forward. But we better be able to, particularly if that might be low enrollment across the state and all the 6 institutions, we better be able to talk about why our program is distinct from other programs. And I do think that's the play to Laurel's question about if our physics program at KU is really focused in a certain area, optical physics, that has something to do with our research enterprise, and we've got, you know, tens of millions of dollars of federal grants, we might not have the greatest enrollments on that, but we desperately need that program for research. And that's the message that I've been kind of hammering along in every meeting that I've been at. So as long as we understand that part of our articulating why we have our programs when they're low enrolled or when we're asking for something is how they meet the institution's larger portfolio in relation to everybody else, then I feel pretty good about where we're going. But we do have to keep remembering that there is that there are different academic reasons to have a program.
Thanks for sharing that, Barb. And you've interpreted well what we've put forward. It's kind of a necessary large grain filter for the system level view, so they kind of understand where direction and energy can be put in terms of asking questions about the portfolio. It's a large portfolio. It's 688 programs. It's a lot for Regents to look at, even on an 8-year cycle. Through these categories, there can be a little more intentionality and say, let's focus in on physics. And if there is distinctions and within those duplications, the program review process, even if it's a call to do so earlier than maybe the established cycle has put forward, allows the Regents to be more deeply informed, allows institutions to bring up some of the issues that you just talked about. I also think, we've laid out some suggested actions for each category. Those are suggested actions. There should be, as you've put forward, a broad-based approach to thinking about the next steps for programs, whether programs are enhanced through additional resources, whether programs are modified to meet changing student and external demands, whether decisions are made to sunset programs entirely. There isn't kind of one clear path, regardless of the category that a program might fall into. Regent Kippinger.
Whoops. So my apologies for being a mic hog here, but I think this tags on to what Provost Bickelmeyer was saying. So kind of in that vein, as we look at things as a system and that program review, one of the things that I've noticed in Basque is we have similar programs in the way that we've done this in the past that constantly, come before us because they aren't something that tends to generate a lot of degrees or may not be, a real high enrollment program. And yet we've all kind of universally seem to have agreed, all being those of us on Basque, and I would say at the university level as well, that these are useful programs that are part of a real rounded cultured student. They set at the core of mission of most of our institutions. Things like perhaps, some of the performing fine arts or philosophy kind of comes up as an example, that it seems like those are kind of constantly on our low program review. Is there any recommendation that you would have as a time-saving feature for us that as a system we could say, there are these certain programs that we just recognize, yes, you need to pay attention to them, at the university level for your own, your own purposes of staffing and what have you, but that we recognize these are part of your core mission. So we don't need to keep spending time looking at those, that we can focus on some of the ones that, maybe lie outside of that core mission of university and really do tie more to, okay, what are industry demands and those types of things and why they're being offered. Do you have any insights on that?
An initial insight, my caution would just be to avoid thinking about carve-outs early on, to kind of think about just how this gets put in place first and make sure that those processes are smoothed out. Certainly English and philosophy undergraduate major, attuned to kind of what those programs offered me as an undergraduate student. But we think about what those programs offer to a portfolio, and if they're part of kind of a core gen ed requirement, or they're offered to allow students the opportunity to kind of gain some early knowledge about a specific discipline, the question should often be asked, and I would encourage Regents and institutions to ask it: does the offering as structured as a program, courses from the 100 to 400 level, is that necessary to allow kind of the opportunities that you put forward as a kind of well-rounded student, or for opportunities for students to engage in different disciplines than what their major might be? The answer might be yes. Yes, that's required. We kind of want those upper level courses. We kind of want it structured in a certain way that students can leave with packaged credentials that are in a degree. The answer might be a step back. We've worked with systems and institutions that have realized, our math courses are always going to fill. Everybody takes math. We don't have a lot of math majors at the bachelor's level. We're going to stop packaging that as a program, but we're still going to maintain our robust offerings on the course level and faculty side to kind of serve the student demand. So great thinking as a next step in terms of, is there another kind of subset of program review that happens once processes have been established and smoothed out? But I would just caution early on and against kind of carving out this. We don't need to look at these right away.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. Will we get any kind of setup? You couched that as here's a good next question to ask. Will we get something like that? So kind of some guiding questions of, here's kind of what to do in the next step going forward. Here's what the next ideation of processing this could look like as well. Because, I see this like peeling an onion. There'll be layers to it. And
our final narrative summary, Regent Kiplinger, will provide some considerations moving forward for the immediate, kind of near term and long term, in ways that sustain and inform the proposed framework.
All right, great. I will try to be quiet now. Other people
I see
talk.
Provost Tabor has raised his hand, so I'm going to go out there next.
Thanks, Mike. So I appreciate this conversation, and I think the framework as it's been laid out can work quite well, because it gives the institutions the opportunity to really explain and understand and explore the nuance and the various ways in which a program can serve the missions of a university. One of the ways that hasn't been mentioned, although Regent Kiplinger was just starting in this direction, that I think is important, is there are dependencies across the curriculum. So the example of physics that you've given, I mean, our engineering students all need physics, and you mentioned math, so there are, and I'm not just talking about service, I'm talking about, there's actually a need for a physics major in order to serve an institution that has strong engineering programs and things like that. So that kind of, being able to understand how programs fit together at a research university, I think, is an important part of this, and that's the institutional voice that needs to be able to explore that.
Thank you, Provost Tabor. All right, well, I know there's much to consider with this framework. I want to remind everyone on the call that institutions at Regent Winter, Winter, feel free.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, I wonder if you could give us some context here with respect to your findings relative to other institutions that you have done the same work for. For example, what surprised you pleasantly? What surprised you in a not so pleasant way? For example, you mentioned the number of programs that you found that need to be on the review category. Is that more than you would have thought in an institution like, a system like ours, or less? Please give us a little context here relative to other institutions.
Certainly. I would say the distribution that we saw in the three categories that we put forward is relatively stable and normal compared to what we see at isolated institutions, whether public or private, and at the system level as well. And so the slice, that initial kind of large grain slice that we're providing at the system level framework, smaller buckets at the kind of maintain and review and monitor level, and the core concentration, both in volume and percent at the optimized level, was what we anticipated. A surprise that we had, I know my colleague Katie and I talked about this at length, was the level of duplication that we saw in the data. And again, we're looking at system level data. To Provost Bicklemeyer's and Provost Taper's point, there are duplications with distinctions. We don't get into that granularity, but just at the surface, the level of duplication and where that duplication was not in the maintained category. I was also struck, and this is kind of in a nod to recent changes that KBOR has put in place at institutions regarding general education. If we look at both the bachelor's level, that list of programs that I shared, I'll go to the slide here for a second. We look at this list: chemistry, history, math, physics, sociology, English, typically programs and courses that are aligned with general education offerings. So we think about how are these courses contributing to gen ed? How are these courses being structured, are folding into programs overall, is something that jumped out at me.
Thank you.
And Barb, I see your question in the chat. Yes, we will post this PowerPoint. Again, this is the PowerPoint we're sharing today, ideally for the data steering and faculty advisory group. It's labeled draft. Based on feedback we may get from you, there may be slight iterations, but this is the core of the presentation that we'll bring forward to the Regents in December, but we'll post this version on the project website probably as soon as today. Amy at KBOR is pretty quick about posting that, so we'll get that up.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one other question, and I hesitate to ask this, but I don't know a better time to do it. This is a lot of data, and it's a structure that makes a lot of sense. And again, it's great to have common definitions, and there's a lot to digest here. And it's really about creating a new inflection point, I guess, because this all started when we were talking about what is academic portfolio, or not academic portfolio, what's academic program review for at the institutional level. And when we are given a list, when each institution is given a list from the board about our low enrolled programs, and we're asked to comment and explain, what happens from that. So this really started with, why do we do what we do? We go through a lot of effort. It doesn't necessarily create changes. Doesn't seem efficient or effective. And so how do we do it differently? This all begs a question, because it is an inflection point of looking at the data differently, of looking at it more holistically, of informing decision making. But it, like everything else, is we can hear this once and that's informative, or we can do it once with RPK's help, and that's interesting. But now I start to ask the question about, how is the process going to change, and how is that process change going to be sustainable, and how are we going to be engaged in it? So are those conversations happening somewhere about how the process changes, who does the work, how it is maintained or sustained, and how we're involved in it as institutions, so we feel we're participating as opposed to having things done to us? So what about that next step?
Yeah, it's a great point, Barb. I'll speak to the last point first in terms of replicability and sustainability. We did leverage existing data structures. So it's kind of data that KBOR Data Research and Planning had available. There was some manual kind of recreation of certain data elements that we consider kind of secondary, time to degree, time to graduation, those sorts of things. But we're confident in working with that entire team over the last 10 months that replicating this data structure is entirely possible on an annual basis. So we're confident in that, and certainly would encourage continuing conversations with that team to make sure their questions are answered. In terms of ensuring that there's engagement from all stakeholders, starting with provosts to chief information research officers to shared governance bodies to faculty, our intent in bringing forward this presentation and this proposed framework to the Regents in December is to give them something to consider. The direction that the Regents take from that consideration are entirely, by process and kind of governance authority up to the regions. We would encourage, as we always do, and we'll make this clear with the regions, and the regions have made it clear that this is their proposed intent as well, to make sure that institutions have the opportunity to ask the questions they want to ask, that there's a common understanding of whatever direction of whatever decisions are made moving forward. We are also available, have been available to answer any questions from any bodies, whether that's kind of a core group at an institution or a larger representative of cross institutions, to make sure there's awareness and transparency in terms of the work that we did.
I appreciate that. I'm going to push just a little bit more, and maybe, Mike, this is just something to facilitate as we move forward. And I say this truly with all respect to everybody who's on this call, and knowing that everybody has roles and responsibilities in this mix, and wanting something better to come out of this for the relationship between the individual institutions and the regents as we do presentations on this, and working as closely as we can, and not making more work for anybody and regent staff, and doing our work. So I'm trying to give all of the nods to I'm going to ask a hard question, which is, it's great that the data is replicable. It's great that we as institutions kind of know what to do. It's great that we've got a data resource team behind this that involves people from the institutions and people from the board. But when I talk about process and sustainability of that process, individual regents cycle in and out in years, and regent staff do a big bulk of work with the institution. So there really needs to be clarity of process and role, and who's got to do what, and how this all shakes out on a regular basis if we do that. And that's regent staff. It's the relationship between the regents and the regent staff and the institutional level data people, as well as the provost and faculty, need to be seen in it. So I do think that point about clearly identifying who's got what role and responsibility in this, and that we have the resources to get it done, is going to be massive, or it's going to be a nice thing we did once, and there's regent champions, and then we're going to kind of go someplace else. So I hope that we articulate policy, process, role, and responsibility by the time we're all done.
Thank you, Provost Wickenmeyer. And our third bullet point, while not directly speaking to that in terms of kind of sustaining, it is our intent in that language buried a bit that, through the already standardized regents onboarding processes, new regents are onboarded, that there's an opportunity to build in, hey, this is the academic portfolio review framework. This is how regents use it. We can also envision down the road, as chief academic officers move positions and new ones are onboarded at the appropriate levels, that there's also an opportunity facilitated across the system for those individuals to be aware of the academic portfolio review framework. So your policy, process, and procedures comments are well heard, and I know there's some regents on the call today that are taking notes as well. And we're going to turn to Regent Kiplinger right now.
I just want to say, Provost Bickelmeyer, I've made some similar notes to what you were saying, and wrote that all down, and particularly underline policy, as I think that's a really good way to make sure that we institutionalize this, so that it doesn't get lost as there's turnover in individual regents, and certainly needs to be an inclusive process with all of you, so this is done in partnership, which I think further helps embed this in the way that we do business, and that we get it right the first time, and that it is sustainable. But thank you very much for your comments, and thank you for everyone who has worked on this. I know that this initial dive into all this data has been a heavy lift for everyone, and we truly do appreciate it. And thank you, Mike and Katie, for your work as well.
Thank you.
Regent Winter, did you want to add anything else? I saw your hand was up, but now it's down. No. Okay, we'll keep going.
Right. Well, still feel free to formulate questions in your mind, but just to make sure we get this out there. Our next steps, we're going to present this, what you saw today, maybe some slight iterations in language. The academic portfolio review of the Kansas Board of Regents on December 14th. We'll provide a final report in January to the Regents and all stakeholders that will include a summary narrative of the academic portfolio review framework and the workload review that we've completed as well. Jill?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. I wanted to just quickly say I concur with the points that Provost Bickelmeyer made, and just want to urge as we continue to go through that we think about all of the ramifications of the decisions that we make with this information. So thanks a lot for the presentation and the work, and want to be a part of this journey as we continue on. And I think that's important.
Thank you.
I'll also just reiterate on the next step slide in terms of what we have been sharing out. This was admitted, the framework is really focused on just a few variables, and we talked a lot about secondary variables and other information. Everybody did so much work around all of those secondary variables. So they're all there in the data that all the institutions are getting back. So as they kind of think about how their programs fall within this framework, again, just looking at these 5 years of analysis, there's so much more information that you'll have about each program: graduation rates, retention, time to degree, looking at credit hour productivity, faculty FTE. There's just lots of information there for folks. So hope that you have fun with all of those robust data sets, and thank you to everybody who was involved, the data team in particular, with building out those robust data sets.
All right, with that said, I want to thank everybody for your time. Those of you on the steering and data team who've been regular attending, appreciate your attendance as well. Those in the faculty advisory group, appreciate your contributions and willingness to continue to ask questions. And for those of us who have joined us on the live stream, thank you for participating and being informed as well. Our last slide, you have our contact information shared in the chat earlier, was the feedback form that's available on the project website. Certainly encourage all of you to facilitate the sharing of that feedback form and making those who aren't yet aware of the project's website of its location. So we have RPK Group for Rick Stavlos and Katie Hagan. I appreciate your time today and look forward to hearing from all of you as you kind of think about and consider what we put forward today. Thank you.